St. Teresa of Avila was born in 1515 in Avila, Spain. Books tell us that she was a tiny little lady, but was bold and fierce, especially in her faith. And so one time, this small lady is coming from ministry. It is raining and a very wet night, and she's on a horse. And so she falls down. And she looks up to heaven and says, God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them. My name is Mueni Wambua, and I am a friend of God. It's been a journey to become a pastor. Some of you may refer to me as Pasi. And this is Pasi, short of pastor, not what my relatives would call an iron box. And sometimes when we stand and say we are ministers of the gospel, it's easy to have illusions of, are they perfect? How do they live their life? What do they do? Do they shop from the heavenly supermarket every Sunday? But we have frailties, we have weaknesses. I support Manchester United. It keeps me humble. It keeps me prayerful, but it keeps me hopeful as well. But before I go on too much, let me tell you a bit about myself. I am a lastborn. And it's possible that that's my superpower. But I'm also a daddy's girl, through and through. And let me tell you something about my dad. My dad made me feel that I could do anything I set out to do. If I went home and told my dad that I want to hang a picture on the moon, he would ask me, what color of thread do you want to use? How low do you want the picture to hang? Because hang the picture on the moon, I definitely would. And that was my dad. He made me know that I was loved. He believed in me. He made me know that I could do anything that I set out my heart to. And so you can imagine, on the most mundane morning ever mandate, on my 46th birthday, my dad passed on. It continues to be one of the most difficult journeys I walk to this day. They said many things to us. They said Dad had gone to be with the Lord. And I wondered, wasn't he with the Lord here? He has gone to his heavenly abode, they said. What about his earthly heart? We loved him, but the Lord loved him more. What does that say about us that have been left living? They said many things that just left me feeling, I wonder what's going on in this space. Back to that Monday morning, one of the first people that called me to wish me a happy birthday was a dear, dear friend called Alice Mbaye. Alice called and said, Pasi, happy birthday. And I quickly said, sorry, my dear, birthday has been cancelled. Dad has died. Alice was in shock and said, Pasi, let me call you back. Fast forward to the days that were blurry, and we are planning a funeral, and it's still not making sense. And ministers of the gospel would come home and refer to my mother as Mujane. What? When did her name change? This same woman that people were telling us that Dad had slipped away in silence to heaven. My parents were married for 55 years. My dad never did anything silently. And my dad never did anything without telling my mom. So it was a strange place. But we finally buried my dad on the 31st of December, 2020. It was a hard day. A few days later, I get a call from Alice's brother, Alex, and he says, Percy, I'm so sorry we're not able to make it for the funeral, but your friend was admitted in hospital. And I'm like, oh yeah, actually I do remember. During funerals, everything is so blurry. There are so many people, you have no idea what's going on. So he says, I'm sorry we didn't make it, but Alice had gone to the hospital for a routine checkup, and she's still in hospital, and she's just had surgery. And so we just wanted to let you know. And I remember just thinking, okay, as soon as I get back to Nairobi, I will come to the hospital. And I went to visit my friend. 15 days into the year, January 15th, my dear, dear friend was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. What's going on with the world? As many times we do this, when someone you love gets unwell, we quickly rally around them. Family and friends came together and we raised funds, and Alice was to be going off to India for treatment, and she left on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day with a twist. In this season, one of the things that I had known that I would do in the first 40 days after burying my dad, in the first 40 days of January of the year, really, 2021, I knew I would want to take time and grieve my dad. Not as a pastor, not as a therapist, but purely as a daughter. But here I was, in the middle of planning to grieve my dad. I was also navigating a friend of mine that was really unwell. And some nights I spent at the hospital. And then after she went to India, some nights I just spent them just sitting up and staring at the ceiling and questioning God and wondering, what is this going on here? Why is my world falling apart? And looking at people and wondering, can you guys tell the world is falling apart? And almost being angry with people because their lives are going on and mine is falling apart. When Alice went to India, one of the conversations we needed to have was, generally they say that when someone has a terminal illness, having a therapist walk with you in that journey helps their recovery process. And when they told Alice about this, Alice said, my therapist is Percy. And so throughout her stay in India, we had virtual sessions. February, March, April. There were good days when we would see progress. Then there were hard days when the WhatsApp group would rally together and pray and pray. And then there were days when there would be silence and we don't know what's going on in India. And May came around, and Alice was really struggling. And we began to have what we would call end-of-life conversations. End-of-life conversations are essentially conversations that you begin to have when there is an end looming. It was hard. And we would have deep conversations with Alice. Deep conversations. Difficult conversations. But one thing I remember about my dear, dear friend was that in all this, while her body was wasting away, her faith was strong. There are times I wondered, is she the one encouraging me or am I the one helping her through this journey? Her faith was strong. She really, really knew where she was going. And on 22nd of June, almost exactly 6 months after my dad passed on, my dear, dear friend rested. This season, I thank God for the friends and family that I had around me. I was loved through this season. Love carried me. The healing power of love is not a mythical thing. I thank God I had Midi. Midi was a domestic goddess. She's the one that supported me to do the non-domestic chores that I needed to do in that period of time. Midi was the help that I needed. Again, she was really a small person and very very unassuming in her presence, but also powerful in her presence. Anne Miyoga Midira was her Tanzanian name. That's what the Tanzanian government recognized her as. Midi had come to our home like 7 years before. We needed a domestic help and she needed a job, and so it was a match made in heaven, and she fit into our home seamlessly. Oh, Midi made nice chapatis. Ooh! Let me tell you those chapatis. They had a little bit of unga, they had a little bit of sugar, sometimes they'd have a little bit of dania, sometimes they'd have a little bit of carrot, they had a lot of bongo flavor and a little bit of tarab, and they were good. And they were good. But you know, something about Midi was the way she cooked with her heart and soul. If I went home and Midi had cut off the fence and cooked, it would slap. She was that good a cook. But in this season, Midi was beyond that. She was my grief whisperer. I know a few things about grief in my head. This was the one time that I was going through grief in my life at that depth. And so I knew that I needed to take time to grieve. I knew that I needed to feel the emotion. But I also knew that my grief was heavy. And I could tell people around me were kind of tiptoeing around me because they knew about my relationship with my dad. And then there were those that knew about my relationship with Alice. And so they're tiptoeing around me, which I can understand. And so in the mornings, I would wake up, send the husband off to work, send the children off to school, and then break down and fall apart. I needed to do that. And when I would fall apart, Midi would be there with me. She would hold me. And it wasn't nice crying at it. No, it was the wailing that comes from deep here, deep in your core, that feels like the world is falling apart and it's messy and everything is leaking. But Midi would hold me as I fell apart. She would sit with me and hold me. And then when I finished, she would encourage me to walk with her in our neighborhood. Let's take a stroll. And we would do that, and we would come back home, and she would make breakfast. And then she always made concoctions. Remember Loliondo? We used to call her Dadawa Loliondo because Midi had a concoction for everything. You know, it would have ginger and nutmeg and cinnamon and rosemary, and I'm guessing that in there was a little bit of tarab and bongo flavor, and maybe a little bit of Christina Shusho, but she did it. And those concoctions and her love were healing in that season. Oh, Midi loved me and helped me carry through that season. And then I would sleep after the concoction, and sometimes a massage would be thrown in. But at 3 o'clock, Midi would wake me up and say, Mama, you need to wake up. And I would need to wake up at 3 o'clock and take a bath and look alive because the family was going to come back home. Do you have a Midi in your life? Fast forward. October 2022. And Midi starts feeling a bit poorly. And she's struggling with health. We don't know quite what's happening, and we're getting different kinds of diagnoses, from amoeba to H. pylori, and at one point they recommended surgery because she had a little swelling at the back of her neck. And we didn't know what was going on. But when they said surgery, her aunt in Tanzania said, please ask her to come back home because they live in Arusha. Their home is Arusha. And so there's a big missionary hospital there. And because the auntie knew some doctors there, said, send her back home. Let her come and we will nurse her as family. And so in December, Midi went home. Come January, and when everyone is wondering about this open season, exchange time, I was okay because I knew Midi was going to come back. But we are chatting and we are talking on WhatsApp and we are talking every other day, every other week. She's telling me about the treatment and how the journey is going. And we are talking. We are constantly in touch with Midi, and we are chatting about what's going on with her health, and how she's feeling. She's talking to the kids. And we are waiting. February, March, April, over the Easter weekend, I spoke to Midi on that Saturday, and she was a bit low. For the first time, she sounded like this journey was getting difficult. And we talked, and we prayed. Little did I know what lay ahead. Because on the 8th of May, Midi rested and went to be with the Lord. Throughout my journey from Nairobi to Arusha, I just had questions. God, is this a plan? I remembered St. Teresa of Avila. If this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few. And we buried Midi, and I came back home. One of the things that strikes me in the journey of thick and thin is that we get into these spaces that force us, fix us, plunge us into controversies of the heart. And you're at two extremes, thick and thin, life and death. And what are we supposed to do in that place? What are we supposed to do in that place? Grief is hard. Grief is heavy. Grief gives you a brain fog. Grief leaves you with something called grief fatigue that just feels like you're carrying this weight on your shoulders that you just cannot put down. But these are the lessons that I continue to pick up in this journey. One, that you must always come up for air. AIR is an acronym. A is be authentic in your grief. Allow yourself to feel the emotion. Allow yourself to ask the questions. Allow yourself to sit in that place with the discomfort of the questions in your mind and in your heart. And I know that that's difficult for me because I'm a person of faith. And does my faith negate my grief? Does my grief nullify my faith? Can the two sit together in my heart? Do I have capacity to hold them? Does that make me a friend of God? Or was God like a woman in the kitchen who turned around like this and my life boiled over? Nini usumbua maziwa? But yeah, we must allow ourselves to be authentic in our journey. Feel the emotion. Feel the anger. But don't become an angry person. Feel the emotion. Because only in feeling the emotion do you deny the emotion the capacity to carry you away with it. Once you allow yourself to feel the emotion, you allow yourself to own the emotion and write your journey and own your journey. Second thing is I. I is hard for us as human beings because we live in a world of information and knowledge and rational thinking. I is in conclusion. Can we learn to live with the inconclusion of loss? The questions we had. Why by birthday, God? You had 365 days to choose from, surely. Well, 345 when you remove my husband, my children, my brothers, my sisters. We're a big family, so maybe about 20. But he had 345 days to choose from. Why my birthday? Why Midi? She was so young and so gracious and so kind. Why Alice? Alice and I had a couple of things in common. Alice and I shared a love for our fathers. Alice was an only daughter and a firstborn, and so we knew what it is to be loved by our fathers and to hold the attention of our father's heart. In fact, as we talk about in conclusion, I'm reminded that a few days before my birthday, before that birthday, Alice and I had lunch. And during that lunch, we were planning how I would go to Eldoret to visit her father in 2024, and she would come to Kitui to visit my father. But now that was never to be, because Alice would never get to meet the James Nzoka Mumo, because he died on my birthday. How do you live with the inconclusion? How do you live with the conversations that you never had? The could have, should have, would have, should have. You know, the questions that we keep wondering. Could I have said this? Could I have done this differently? Did I do enough? Should I have done more? And how do we live in that space? How do we live in that space? Finally, R. Reimagine. Reimagine your life. Reimagine the person that you loved. How would they want your life to continue now that they are not here? Would they want your life to end because their life ended? Reinvent your life. Reevaluate your life. Reevaluate your relationships. Reevaluate your choices. Reevaluate everything that's going on around you, because guess what? As sure as taxes, grief is always going to happen. Grief will surely come in our lives. And so maybe if we knew that grief is going to happen in our lives would be a bit more thoughtful. Our lives would be a bit more intentional. Our lives would be a bit more conscious. Our lives would be a bit more aligned. Think about it. If you walked into a room and there's, wireless internet, and it is unlimited, you download everything, right? But when you're downloading from your bundles, you're kind of sparing, eh? I don't want to download this. This I can download when I get to wireless internet. Our lives are not unlimited. We are living on bundles. And sometimes it's borrowed bundles. But finally, as we speak about that R, God is not random. God is not random. God is not like up there in heaven and looking down and saying, Ati Mueni's father died on her birthday. No, that's not God. And I do know that my life is in the hands of a loving God because he declares it. And so I believe it. I am loved. My father was one source of love, but in the death of my father, I have received love from different places, different people, different colors, different versions. And I love to receive that love because it reminds me that I am loved. So I don't know where you are with your losses. Whatever loss you're going through, would you remember to come up for air, to be authentic, to live with the inconclusion, and to reimagine your life afresh? Because grace has brought me this far, and grace will lead me home. Thank you.